This video is sponsored by Pulsar Modular. Hello, I am Woochia and welcome to my Bits and Bobs. And today I have a plan. I have a plan that is in two parts. So the first part would be to talk about filter set that is called P565 Siren from Pulsar Modular. So part of the plan is to show you everything it can do, which is way more than simple filtering, and the other side of the plan is to show you sound design techniques that you could apply with any filter or effect. So if that sounds good to you, let's start. I will record some sounds we designed today to make a small sample pack that I will share on my Patreon. So if you are a Patreon, you can go ahead and download it. In the meantime, here are the kind of sounds we are going to do. So this is the P565 Siren, and this particular filter is an analog emulation based on the Uray 565T and the Moog ladder filter. The Siren has a lot of character and it's very resonant. So here is Ableton's filter with a high resonance. And here is the Siren. Alright, so this has a lot of knobs, so I will quickly describe everything starting from the top and working my way down. That will make it easier for later. If you want to skip that, you can check the timings below and go to the next section. So at the top you have a bar with a few buttons. The first one is the bypass, so it's the same as this button to turn the effect on and off. Then you have a button to flip the phase of the dry signal and one to flip the phase of the wet signal. So this can allow you to isolate the processed part of the sound. I'll explain. The wet signal is the signal that is processed by the effect, right? But in that processed signal, you still have some frequencies from the original sound. Like a distortion adds frequency, a filter removes some, but in the wet signal you still have frequencies from the dry signal. So if you put the dry wet at 50%, those frequencies from both the dry and wet channels will add up. Well, if you flip the phase of either the dry or the wet signal, the frequencies that are common in both will cancel each other out instead. So you will be left with the rest, the frequencies that are different from the dry signal. That's the theory though. In practice, that can mostly help you get a cleaner sound. Here is with the distortion at 100% wet, at 50% wet, and now if I flip the phase, see, you can add a clean sub underneath. It has a bit more space for layering. And that was the first trick, by the way. In Ableton, you can flip the phase of a sound with the utility effect, if you want to replicate that with other effects. The next button is to activate the sidechain, which can control the envelope followers there. We'll see how it works. This one is the step filter mode, which snaps the cutoff of the filter on specific values. And this one is to turn on oversampling. This can help you get a cleaner sound with distortion as well. Because distortions add higher frequencies, and when those frequencies are too high, they can be misinterpreted and create artifacts in the sound. That's what we call aliasing. So you can turn on oversampling here to avoid this aliasing. Next you have the A-B button, so you can make two versions of a patch and compare them by switching between A and B, and you can copy A to B or vice versa with this button. And then is the list of presets. You can save a new preset with this button or update the selected one with this one. And the last one is the menu that we will see a couple of times. Then going down we have a low pass filter here with its resonance that is there, and you can choose its slope between 12, 18 and 24 dB per octave. The steeper the slope, so the higher is this number, the more resonant is the filter. And you can turn it on and off with this LED here. On the other side you have a high pass filter with exactly the same settings, with the resonance here and the slope at the top. Then you have two more filters in the middle, which are identical. You can choose if they are a band reject, which will turn down the frequency it's pointing at, or if it's a bell, which will boost the frequency it's pointing out. So it's like a EQ point. So you can select different bandwidth for each one, represented with these icons, and you turn it on by clicking on this LED. So the second one is exactly the same with exactly the same settings, and at the top of each of them you have a range switch that you can turn on to have a more precise cutoff. So at 1x the range would go from 20 Hz to 200 Hz. At 10x it will go from 200 Hz to 2000, and at 100x it will go from 2000 to 20,000 Hz. Alright, so now these filters actually have a second mode. Right now they are either a band reject or a bell EQ, but if you click on the name you can make them either a notch filter, which completely cut a frequency, or a band pass filter, which will let a band of frequency through but cut everything below and above. So underneath the filters are the envelope followers. They will basically listen to the sound that come in the effect and move the cutoff of the filters depending on the level of the signal coming in. The left envelope can control the high pass filter or this filter, and the right envelope can control either the low pass filter or this filter on the right. In terms of controls, you have the amount to tell if you want to move the cutoff up or down. Then you have the attack to tell how fast the cutoff starts to move, and the release to tell how fast it comes back to its place. Funny thing is that the envelope actually reacts faster with higher values. That was a bit confusing at first. And then to make it react faster, you have a speed switch that can go to speed 1, 2 or 3. See, with the higher speed, the cutoff has time to go up further. And there are actually two modes that you can try for these envelopes. That's in the menu, and you can turn on or off the option MU. And finally, you have the level knob to control the signal controlling the envelope if you need to. And you can also choose to control this envelope with the sound of another track by activating this option at the top. Next up is the distortion with the drive knob in the middle. Then you have the option to place this distortion before or after the filters with this pre-post switch. And you can distort the sound way more than the maximum drive by activating this overdrive mode. Even with the drive at 0, you will hear the distortion, and resonant peaks sent in it will result in interesting sounds. Also, don't hesitate to play with the level of the sound you send in it to make it react more or less. And then finally at the bottom you have the output level, which is the output of the wet signal, and you have a mini out, which is the overall volume of the plugin. On the other side you have the dry wet knob, simple, and there is this delay knob that goes up to 100 milliseconds. By default that delays the wet signal, but you can decide to delay the dry signal instead. That's in the menu there. That's a simple knob, but that allows you to do many things, so we'll see that in a moment. For now, it's time to finally begin playing with it and design some stuff. So, as you probably noticed, there is no LFO or modulator on there, and that's kind of intentional, because if you click on this arrow here, you will have access to all the parameters, and you can control any of them with Ableton's LFO from there. That's in audio effects and modulators, so you could use them on any effect you have. So I'll start by linking the first LFO to the resonance of the filter, for example, to add motion. So it's this one, link it and adjust the settings. In addition to motion, we can add rhythm with LFOs, and my favorite for that is the one called Shaper, because you can draw your own custom shape with it. So I'll map this one to the high pass cutoff to make like a fake sidechain, and leave some room for the kick by removing the lows on some beats. I'll play with the minimum and maximum values here for the modulation, so it has the right movement. Now let's add a couple more shapers to have some fun and a more complex sound. I will add one that will switch the type of the middle filter between bell and bandpass filter. I'll add another on the volume to have a real sidechain effect by ducking it on every beat. I'll also put an OTT at the end just to beef it up a little bit, and I'll also add an envelope follower from Ableton to control the resonance of the low pass filter. So adding a lot of different modulations in this way is very fun and can really add up some rhythm and character to a sound, and that's easy to overlook sometimes. So now I'd like to take a closer look at the envelopes and show you something in the same veins with modulations. So the patch I'm starting with is this one. It's a simple sawtooth wave going through a delay and reverb. And here is how it sounds being low-passed after being distorted. So now let's activate the envelope follower and listen to the movement it adds. Well, we could try to make it snappier by putting the speed at 3 and putting the attack and release at the maximum. And I don't know for you, but I think the envelope could be snappier. So to do that, we will use Ableton's MIDI envelope, which will take the trigger of a MIDI note directly to move the cutoff point. I have it set up with 0 attack, 0 sustain, and a little bit of decay and release. And it is controlling the cutoff of the low-pass filter. And this is super interesting to be able to have both this MIDI envelope and the envelope follower controlling the same cutoff knob, because that's not something you can usually do. See here, I'm clicking to try and map that cutoff knob to that new LFO, but it won't, because it's already assigned. To finish with envelopes, let's see how the sidechain works. Here is the patch I'm starting with. So say we want the filter to react to the drum track. We'll select the drums from this drop-down menu, then we'll activate the sidechain with this button up here and adjust the envelope. Or we can use it on the high pass as well to remove some of the lows when the kick hits. Pretty cool and different from the regular sidechain compressor. Don't hesitate to try sidechain filtering with the filters you have. Okay, so let's design a new patch and have a look at the distortion. I'll design a bass, so I've set up 2 chains, one for the top layer that will be processed and one for the sub that will stay clean. So here's the patch I'm starting with in the top layer. Pretty simple, that's kind of a sawtooth going through a high pass filter with a keytracking. And this is the sub layer, just a saturated sine wave. So first I'll distort that with the overdrive activated. And then I'll activate the filter in bandpass mode. The goal is to select only a band of frequency to go in the distortion, because the distortion adds harmonics for every frequency present in the sound, so sending only a band of frequency allows to shape the tone better. Then I've added another instant of Siren to use it as a parallel distortion this time. The distortion happens before the filtering and I don't have the overdrive on, just to use a different distortion. Then I'll activate the low-pass filter, which cutoff is controlled by a MIDI envelope, and it doesn't have much resonance, it's just to have a clearer sound in the transients, it's not for boosting any frequency. Then I'll turn up the dry wet to blend the sound from before and after this effect, and that's what makes it a parallel distortion. And finally, to seal the deal, I will invert the phase of the signal coming in to cancel out the frequency the dry and the wet signal have in common. I feel like it makes it cleaner in the lows so we can hear better the transients, and we can even emphasize the transients with the compressor. Oh, there's one thing I almost forgot to talk about, and that's something I wanted to do for a long time, but found a way to do it only recently. Say I want this cutoff to follow the keys I play on the keyboard, to open more with higher notes and close more with the lower notes. That is called keytracking, and that allows to have more consistent tone across multiple octaves. Well, how would you set that up in Ableton? In the MIDI effect, there is an effect called expression control, and with it you can control any knob with a lot of MIDI parameters like the velocity, mod wheel, etc. Well, if you click on one of them, you can choose keytrack. So I'll use it to control the cutoff of the low-pass filter. Okay, that works, but I noticed the frequency seems better tuned to the note I played when I used the range from 0 to 50%. Now that's cool, it's tuned, but what if I want to offset this cutoff? Keep the same range between two notes so it stays in tune, but maybe overall close the filter a bit more. Well, we could use the MIDI pitch effect. We place one before the expression control and one after. The idea is to detune the MIDI note before the key tracking, so it will adjust the cutoff to a higher or lower frequency, and then repeat the MIDI note afterwards, so the instruments will still receive the note we play on the keyboard. So you can detune it as much as you want, you just have to compensate it on the other side of the key track. To make it easier to use, I will make a macro knob by grouping all that in a MIDI effect track. I'll link the first pitch effect to the macro knob and the second pitch to that same knob. Then in the mapping values, I will put the range I want in the values for the first knob, and for the second knob, I will just invert those numbers, so they always balance out. So that's something I could have done with the previous patch with the bandpass filter, to always send a band of frequencies tuned to the note I play. Okay, now I would like to have a look at the delay knob, because there are a few things that we could do with it. Here's the sound I'm starting with, that's a preset from Vital. And here is how it sounds with Siren. Now hear how it sounds when I turn the delay knob while it's playing. See, turning the delay knob during playback affects the pitch, so we can take advantage of that with an LFO. So let's assign it to the delay knob. Right now the effect is too drastic, but if we reduce the depth and the speed of the LFO, we can make the pitch flutter just a little bit to have like a VHS effect. If you crank up the rate and the depth to the maximum, the pitch will oscillate so fast that it will enter into the FM territory. And then between the two you can make some nice vibrato effect. Now if we put the dry wet at 50%, we'll hear both the original and the delayed signal, and if the delay time is short enough, some phase cancellation will happen, and we'll have the effect of a comb filter. This is the type of comb filtering you'd get with a flanger, but because turning the delay knob affects the pitch, if you use an LFO on it, you would get more of a chorus effect. And because the delay time goes from 0 to 100 milliseconds, you can consider the range percentage as milliseconds as well. They'd be the same values, so 15% would equal 15 milliseconds here. Now, a chorus effect or a flanger or a comb filter would normally have a feedback knob. So let's see how we can build one in Ableton Live. So to create a feedback loop, you'd need to create a return track and send your instrument track to it. On the return track, Siren's dry wet doesn't need to be at 50% because the return track sound will be layered with the original sounds anyways. So from there, all you have to do is to right-click the return button on the return track to allow the return track to be sent into itself. This will create a feedback loop, and this send knob will become your feedback knob. So let's add an LFO to hear better how it sounds with the chorusing effect. Now that we have access to a feedback knob and to a delay knob, the obvious way to use Siren is to use it as a delay effect. The delay would be limited to 100 milliseconds, but the interesting thing is that we can combine it with all the filters and distortion, and having the delayed signal slightly filtered and saturated is the basis of any tape delay. So Siren in this way allows you to design your own tape delay. Be very careful though with the feedback loops. The best practice would be to put a limiter at the end of the chain to not damage either your ears or your equipment. So that's pretty much all the things I wanted to show you in terms of tips and tricks. To sum it up, we saw mainly how to isolate what's added by an effect by inverting the phase of the processed signal, how to use LFOs and shapers to add motion but also rhythm to a sound, how to use a MIDI envelope to have a responsive attack and combine it with a built-in envelope of your plugins, how to use a sidechain envelope and sidechain filters, how to bandpass a signal before distorting it to shape your tone better, how to use parallel distortion and how it combines with the first tip, how to set up key tracking in Ableton Live, how to make a VHS effect, FM and vibrato from a delay knob, how to make comp filtering and chorusing effect from a delay knob, how to set up a custom feedback loop in Ableton Live, and quickly how to design your own tape delay. And also I hope you enjoyed this tour of the P565 Siren by Pulsar Modular. I sure enjoyed it, and I guess the length of this video shows. It's a very complete and complex multi-effect, but it stays easy to use, and it is sold as a filter set, but it can do a lot more than simple filtering. So I hope you enjoyed that, and that you got maybe some new techniques or things that you would like to try out. I would like to thank a lot my Patreons who are supporting the channel. If you are a Patreon, you can now download the sample pack from this video that I shared on there. Thanks a lot to Pulsar Modular for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. In the meantime, have a good day or a good evening. Take care and I'll see you next time.